Okay, you're on.
Okay. Hi, everybody. This is Linda Rottenberg, and I am the co-founder and CEO of Endeavor. I am joined by my longtime colleague and co-managing director of Endeavor Catalyst, Alan Taylor. Alan, you want to say hello?
Hey, folks.
And this is the first installment of a new series we are calling Endeavor Presents, Leading Through Crisis. And we are so thrilled that the first person we are featuring, and actually someone who helped us design this idea, is none other than the blitzscaling founder, funder, board member, podcaster, public intellectual, and most importantly, great friend, both of Endeavor and to me personally, Reid Hoffman. Reid, welcome.
It is awesome to be here, and I can't express my delight and appreciation more for organizations like Endeavor in times like this, because the only way that we're actually going to make the future is through entrepreneurship. So when we were at the kind of a mini board meeting, kicking around stuff, it was like, how do we best help all of our people? And it was like, well, let's start doing this because it's so chaotic and so uncertain. So it's just awesome to be here.
And what you're referring to is we had a Catalyst committee meeting last week, and you said, hey, I'll do this, but we can't wait. Let's do it next week. And not only did we manage to get on your calendar, the one helpful thing about COVID-19 is we can get on your calendar. No, but not only did we pull this off, but we decided that, Zoom, we have a level at which we can't go above. And we said, all right, we're only going to offer this to Endeavor entrepreneurs or to high potential candidates that are coming through these virtual ISPs, that are international selection panels that we're now doing virtually. That's it. We have over 650 people online right now, just with that group, all entrepreneurs, all founders. So this is awesome, Reid. And actually representing 30 countries or more. So everybody knows your story, I think, in terms of PayPal and LinkedIn and Greylock and Masters of Scale, which we were so honored to be featured in, and everyone on here has listened to, and Blitzscaling and all your wonderful books. But I wanted to have the group get to know your Endeavor story. So I thought it would be fun to hear in your own words how you came to know about Endeavor and your journey with us over the last decade.
So I had, of course, heard about it for a while because, one of the things that I think that the broad world doesn't appreciate enough about entrepreneurship is that with the turmoil and the recreation of things that happens in modern industry, entrepreneurship is the only way that the new jobs and products and services are created. So I track networks and other things are doing it. But it'd been kind of like, oh yeah, this is a global thing and it's based in New York and I don't get to New York that often and it has offices everywhere and many of those places, because I tend to try to travel as little as possible, didn't get there. And then I think you reached out or someone said, hey, could you come and talk in Miami? And I said, look, I've always been tracking this organization. And
this was 2007?
I think it was 2007 or so. Yeah. And it's like, and you guys do awesome work. So of course I'll figure out how to build a trip around Miami and get down there. And, one of the things that I find magical about entrepreneurs is a part of how we make progress in human life is by being optimists, by saying, look, we can create a better future than the one we're in right now. And the magic of that event was like, oh my God, here is a whole group of people all around the world who say, look, we have different cultures, we have different sports teams, we have different languages, but we're all entrepreneurs and we're all building the future. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. And then you came and said, well, hey, it would be really great if you were to, join us and do stuff. And I said, well, I'd really want this to be kind of more aligned with kind of like, venture models and so forth. As we started talking about Catalyst, that, like with some hotel restaurant or something. I remember the table. I don't remember what the room was.
Yeah.
And we started talking about that.
La Terranea or something. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Let's do it. And that was the beginning of this totally awesome journey. And then, part of the thing that, one of the things that I try to do when I do travel and get to places where I'm a little bit off the beaten track, if at all possible, and Endeavor has helped me this multiple times, I try to actually have a meal with a group of entrepreneurs of that local area and culture, because the shared, kind of intensity of this journey, the throw yourself off a cliff and assemble an airplane on the way down, means that you start with a bridge, because we've had this like almost virtual similar experience of going to war, where we can then start using that as a bridge to talking about like, well, how does our culture think about things, and how does entrepreneurship work here, in Argentina or in Jordan or in, any of these locations? How does it work here relative to other places? And what are the things that are the same, which is surprisingly a lot of the things the same, and what are the things that are different, and how does it also play into the general culture of the area? And it's anyway, we shouldn't do this, but I could wax on for the entire hour about how much I love all the Endeavor stuff.
That's awesome. And you know what? I was laughing this morning and brought such a smile to my face thinking back pre-social distancing, when you brought your lovely wife, Michelle, to one of our ISPs in Turkey and actually got down on your knee and proposed board membership finally. So that was just such a wonderful memory. Alan and I both listened to this special Masters of Scale podcast you did with Bob Safian, the former Fast Company editor, and it was called First Be Human, which was just fantastic. And you talked about humanity first. And one of the things that has struck me with all of the horror, I'm in Brooklyn, I hear the sirens every day, but every time I get on the phone, especially with the Endeavor entrepreneurs, what they're doing, many of our entrepreneurs are acting as first responders. Many are donating, obviously, free services and free goods, including Figs is one of our Endeavor Catalyst and Endeavor companies that has changed medical apparel, and they're donating all of the PPE, masks and gowns, which is incredible. And so I wanted to know, from your standpoint, a month into this, I'd love, what's bringing you hope? Like what are some of the stories that have most captured your heart and mind?
Well, one of the things that's interesting about crises is it really sorts between kind of almost, to be histrionic, heroes and villains. Right. So what you see, I've seen within the US here, trying to help with the various pandemic and PPE and everything else, I've seen some companies go, oh my God, this is a crisis time. We're going to ship you stuff at cost. We're going to, I've helped them get designated, like in New York, an essential business, so we can manufacture PPE within New York and get it to the hospitals. And it's like, oh, I can get you to Cuomo, and Cuomo can get you designated as an emergency essential business, so you can do that because that's really important, and that's how you contribute to the first line in doing this. And you're taking, your employees all have to volunteer and taking a little bit of risk because we're now working in a group together, and it's in a pandemic environment, and all of those moments of heroism. And then you see other companies going, oh, our prices are now 2x. We're going to take any sales order, even though we're not going to tell you we can't fulfill it, which of course throws the thing. And so it's a real chance. That's part of the underlying thing of Be Human. It's a real chance to say, here's where we can actually, in fact, be heroes, because this is what sorts out between people who actually really have a moral character and people who don't, right? And I've seen both. And the kinds of stories, that it's been, kind of on the entrepreneur side has been folks who said, okay, let's try to figure out everything from how do we get a lot of high-scale PPE manufacture equipment, mostly sourced in China, but some local manufacturing. How do we get that up, and how do we get that distributed the right way? How do we navigate the purchase orders and the financing? So there's a bunch of entrepreneurs doing that. There's entrepreneurs that have gone, okay, like for example, Color says, look, we have these labs. We can set up a different testing regime. Scale testing is going to be really important. So what we'll do is actually we'll have a 501c3 that will be raising money and paying for it, but we're only going to charge cost for repurposing our scale labs to start going to scale testing. And then you got folks like Patrick Collison, who said, look, Stripe, who I will help with SMBs and the kind of and the SBA and the stimulus package and all the stuff. But like one of the things we were talking about is we said, because basically the number of conversations that I've been we're like brainstorming, like, okay, what are the leverage points that are not just like that have a scale impact here? We said, well, one of the things that's happening is that there's all these labs and universities. With the labs there, the smart people are there, but the funding structurally doesn't allow them to do anything because they're funded right now. And so this is about a month ago, we said, okay, well, let's stand up this thing, fast grants. And what we'll do is we'll basically say, look, we'll get you a grant within 24 to 48 hours on an application to fund you in your lab to do something that's COVID related, right? Like if you think you have something that could do something on this, you have the lab, you have the people, you just can't spend the money that you got from NIH or something else because it was, there's this bureaucracy and legal, it's like, you can only spend it on this. And so we'll give you the money in order to do it because you have the people. And so unlocking resource like that. So it's the whole range. And this is only within the entrepreneurship side. Like when you get to like CZI BioHub, they're now actually, they stood up such like free testing where they have like 10,000 tests a day that they can do, and they're kind of sourcing in different organizations. They actually, in 2 days, because Joe DeRisi and Steve Quaker are entrepreneurial, they stood up a kind of building, like one of the weird things about this, I don't know how many people know this, the global swab manufacturer is in northern Italy. So when that got shut down, we have a serious swab problem. China has been gearing up, but that's been like a real issue. So what CZI did is they started saying, okay, let's make there's both swabs and test tubes for capturing it. We don't have the material to make the swabs, but we can make test tubes. So they're now providing test tubes. And in 2 days, they stood up the robotics test tubes. So there's a whole range of things. And it's been really awesome.
That's great. And for me, hearing the stories of Endeavor entrepreneurs, one of our companies, LTB in Jordan, serving as the national hotline, a group of our companies in Kenya got together and said, look, we have to take over because our government is just not prepared. What can we do in health tech and fintech and ed tech? Because we all have to solve the problem really at a national level. And I've been saying to people on these Zoom calls we're all on that for me, this experience in the last 3 or 4 weeks has been like a tale of two cities. And every time I'm on the phone with entrepreneurs, there's optimism, there's this can-do spirit. This is how can we, I love this phrase, be the heroes, right? And then you get on the phone with the VCs and the private equity guys, and they're like, you have costs? You have employees? No, cut them all. And you're like, whoa. So in that spirit, Alan and I are dividing this. So part one, we're going to go in as you as the founder of entrepreneurs. Then he's going to get into some of the funding. I just want to tell all of the entrepreneurs on the line, you guys should also be using the chat feature to get questions. And part three are going to be your questions. And in fact, I want to start actually with one of our entrepreneurs' questions. This is from Vladi in Bulgaria of Hello Hungry. And he says, what if you knew 3 months ago what was going to be coming down the pike? What would you have done differently? And thinking about this from the founder's perspective, or even just where you are now, what would you have done differently?
So let's see. What I did do when I, because I'm on a board of a number of different startups and that sort of things, I called them and said, look, it's going to be turbulent times because we don't know what the actual impact is. And one of the things that people haven't, and I didn't predict this level of stay in place and what the economy train wreck would be from it, but it creates volatility. So prepare for volatility. That was the thing I did. Now, if I had known that it was going to be we don't really have a plan in place other than doing the fundamental nuke of, okay, everyone go retreat back to these not real biospheres, but like the stay in place, kind of thing. And that's what's going to happen. Then what I would have done is I would have, like the classic kind of recession kind of thing. So you try to shore up your balance sheet. You try to figure out what are the really essential things that cause longevity and revenue stream and that sort of thing. You do those early. You figure out what the monitoring is, because one of the frequent mistakes in this is you either are too optimistic or too pessimistic, right? You actually both can be serious errors. Everyone tends to say, oh, you can't be too pessimistic. Well, it depends. Like if you're in the travel business in this environment, then yes, you can't be too pessimistic, unfortunately, right? But there's a range. And like, for example, if you're in a B2B and you're fighting, yes, you're businesses will slow down their sales. New purchase orders will take 2 or 3 months to generate. It'll be less. You'll be in a recession. But like, if all B2B business goes away and there's no revenue in B2B in August, we're in an entirely different, like, we're just kind of restarting the whole economy. So you try to align your risks to the risk that you are in, whereas if that risk means the whole world's that way, then the whole world will be working on it. So you align them to the things you are, which is this range between, like, you know, like, how do you be not too pessimistic in terms of planning for what your future is and revenue is, what your cost structure is, and how you can still be growing your business and so on. And then in terms of too optimistic, it's obviously the mistake that people make is they say, well, you know, in like, say you're here in the States, you say, well, you know, at the end of April, the stay in place stuff will go away, and then in May it'll just be like January or November. It'll be great. And you're like, no. The new normal is not going to be the old normal. It might be there in a year from now or 2 years from now, but it's not going to be there. And part of that is to think about, like, even when you have like a B2B business, you say, well, all right, my business serves a lot of small businesses. Well, how many of those are restaurants? You know, how many of those are things that have been seriously impacted? Because, you know, part of what you're going to want as a business providing there is you're going to want to say, look, like, especially if you have something like a digital good, it's like, look, here, you can have my digital software for free for the next 3 months, because you're just going to be standing back. Like, it's much more valuable for me for you to be a customer, live customer 3 months from now, than be trying to weigh you down right now. And that kind of planning is the kind of thing you need to do. And all of that would have been like, start in January, right? Start in February. And I think as I look back upon, and then you also, by the way, you set up your monitoring to know, am I right about where I think my business is going to get back to, what the new normal is going to be? And you have to correct from that, because you may have to correct down, you may have to correct up. But in my own monitoring, when I was thinking about it, what I realized was the moment that I should have said, okay, that the pandemic has left China, right? Like, the moment that the Italy stuff started happening, and then you look around and you kind of go, okay, a lot of these governments are having extremely incompetent responses. They're not gearing up testing. They're not saying, hey, let's slow down travel for a couple of weeks, because, like, you know, look, think of how expensive the stay in place is. You just say, look, let's just close the borders for 2 weeks. That's a much cheaper answer, right? And then really go on top of it. Like, there's a lot of things that would be a lot cheaper than the things that have happened. And, you know, I'm enough through Endeavor and other things, enough of globalists to see craziness in Mexico, craziness in Brazil, like, oh, it's a disease, let's hug each other and so forth. And you're like, okay, like, the disease doesn't care about your social media.
Yeah.
Right?
All right. So, so you brought up the travel tourism industry. You just mentioned Brazil, and we have a question here from Max Milhouse in Brazil, who says, look, I'm in the tourism industry. Do I just say, hey, let me take my current client base, let me take my current teams and skill base, and like pivot to actually outside the core business to an entirely new business? What do I do? And I thought that was a great segue into something you talked about on your Bab Safian contest, which was your SWOT analysis. And yet, how should scale-ups think about, you can explain the SWOT analysis, but how do you make the judgment calls as a scale-up versus a startup where mortality means something different?
So, so very quickly, SWOT analysis. One of the things I actually like from business school. I'm generally a little more skeptical of business school than your average business person. But it's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. SWOT. The normal SWOT analysis is within a normal environment, but you also, when you get to a crisis, you redo your SWOT analysis, because your strengths and weaknesses, your opportunities and threats change in a changing market, in a changing situation. So you say, okay, where does that play to me? And actually, by the way, in many cases, and we'll get to travel because that's the ones I think is hardest, you always see the threat more clearly. It's like, oh God, right? But usually there's some opportunities, not always, and in the more challenging ones, which can travel, that's harder, and there may or may not be there. I'm not Pollyannish in that, like, there's always an opportunity. No, sometimes it just sucks. And so now when you look at it, you say, well, there's a couple of places you could say, look, if you presume a massive crush of the business and a very slow restart, what happens, right? Am I going to get because the government values it? Are they going to protect and sustain it? Yes, no. That may give you one place for longevity. Usually, as entrepreneurs, we're always very nervous about depending on the government because of actual time frames and deliveries and all the rest. And that's a massive risk factor on its own. And then you kind of go, well, all right, do I think that there is some unique part of the business, that the first part of the travel business that will come back, almost like starting a business that will be enough of a beachhead? Like, will there be business travel that will first come back anyway because it's kind of essential and so forth? And there's the ways that I can do that, and I can be ready for that. And maybe that will actually resume some, not the full level, but enough for like getting on the beach and starting a business like in July or August and so forth. And there's something I could do there. Is there, is there other parts that are kind of closer or more adjacent to the business? Now, maybe there isn't, right? I'm not close enough to most travel businesses. The only one, I'm on a board observer of Airbnb, so I have some visibility there. But I don't have I don't see the rest of that as a way to do this. Now, the thing that you then look at is say, okay, well, so what if I'm in a place where I think that the highest probability of all the stuff that are adjacent to my business are potentially like just like, random shots in the dark and that isn't going to really work. And I'd rather be more systemic. Well, you basically, at that point, obviously that's the massive pivot, right? And there's at least two forms of the massive pivot. One of them could be like, let's look at our assets, let's look at the team, let's look at the thing that we do, and just say, great, we're now doing this rather than that. This is now the way that we're playing into this. The second can also be well, look, if we're going to if we think that we're facing mortality anyway, this is one of the things that allows entrepreneurs to take risks. Is like, look, the metaphor of jumping off the cliff and assembling the airplane on the way down is like, look, by default, we're dead. So let's try to do something really amazing, because why not? And so, like, for example, if I was looking at the travel business, like, well, is there a Zoom virtual travel business? Right? Is there something that you could set up in that range? I mean, just like, and I'm not saying that that's a good idea at all, but it's like, is there something that you say, look, I'm just going to experiment with this new category, right? Because part of, generally, when you look across all these businesses, you say, well, look, if in this crisis, there's an experiment that you now can take that you wouldn't have taken anyway, that may persist into something valuable in a year from now or 2 years from now, then that's sometimes a good thing to do. Like, for example, well, let's do remote interviewing for hiring people, or let's change our work process using the following tools and do that. Well, sure, some of it's just during the crisis to make do, but if I can also run an experiment of something that may be useful in a year, then I'm building value into the business, because it won't always be like this in April. Like, right. This is not the new normal.
Okay, right? So yes. So as a segue into Alan and more of the fundraising questions, and I wanted to get into the relationships with entrepreneurs and boards or their funders. And we actually have a number of questions already popping up about, well, what if I'm in healthcare? Mohammed is out of in Egypt says, and this is a booming industry. I'm seeing all these opportunities. Like, how do I pursue those? Or we have Carlos from Closca in Spain saying, well, wait a minute, what's the fine line between opportune and opportunistic? And entrepreneurs are going to view this maybe differently than their boards and funders in terms of the level of seizing opportunities and taking the risks. So how do you overlay that kind of SWOT analysis where entrepreneurs are going to want to end up versus where their funders and boards are going to want to end up?
So, well, first, as Endeavor entrepreneurs, one of the benefits you have Endeavor, right? So
exactly.
Right. So, if you need help wrangling your board, right? This is one of the things Endeavor is here for, right? We have a whole network of people, myself included, people that kind of say, hey, this is what that balance of interest in building an amazing company and being a great servant of society is good for. So do call, right?
Exactly.
We've been doing plenty of that already. Don't worry.
Yes, exactly.
I love that
exactly.
endeavor. Board wranglers, love it.
Yes, no, for sure. Because there is, the tension is exactly right. So then when you say, look, there are a variety of businesses where there's huge opportunity created. There's huge opportunity created in e-commerce. There's huge opportunities created in medical. There's huge opportunities created in kind of distributed work tools, right? I mean, look at the boom in Zoom, for example. I mean, there's just the stack of those
Funded by
things.
Endeavor entrepreneur Santi Subotovsky and Endeavor founding board member Jason Green.
Yes, exactly. And so that's fine. And there's nothing to say, there's nothing wrong with that, right? The fact that there's a good business there. Now, the line between what is ethical and not ethical is pretty straightforward, which is, look, are you unduly profiting? Like, are you raising prices, or are you charging hospitals, et cetera? Like, for example, take Zoom. Zoom said, look, we recognize that there's a bunch of people who really need to use us, who are in desperate straits, who are not, high revenue customers. Great, you guys can have it for free. You're doing education, a whole bunch of kids at home, a whole bunch of university students at home, just use Zoom. It's fine. We'll figure out how to make the cost structure work for us. Go, right? Oh, you're hospitals and so on, just use it, fine, right? Because it's like, okay, that's like, now, we got businesses, we got Greylock, we've got our portfolios. No, we're not raising prices on you, but you still have to pay the prices you would have to have paid last year in order to do this. And it creates a booming business for them, but that's the right kind of balance. And those kinds of principles and heuristics are the right way to do it, which is to say, look, we're not taking disadvantaged people who are at risk and so forth, and we're holding them over a barrel and kind of emptying their pockets, right? We are creating a normal business where we're also being compassionate, being human beings, about who are the folks who are in desperate straits we can do a little something for, right? It could be a free product, it could be a product at cost, it could be some kind of prioritization, but we're paying attention to that as we do that. And of course, look, one, you just do it because it's the right thing to do, because you're an ethical, moral human being who is compassionate for other people in these times. Now, there's also useful in the business because, by the way, the loyalty that people will love you for this is very high, right? So it isn't 100% selfless. It's still the right thing to do, even if it wasn't. But it does also help with establishing that brand and so on. Now, the right way to do this, a little bit like one of the things that's happening with a bit of the Chinese government going around saying, look, we'll give you free supplies, but you have to speak well of us. That also happens to be my view, the orange fungus who's in charge in the US. It's like, no, don't do that. Just do the right thing, right? Just like, like that kind of thing. Anyway, so that's where that is. And there will be a variety of businesses that just have straight out opportunity because of where they are. And you should build into the opportunity. I mean, part of the thing that's awesome about business, you say, look, you're building products and services that people need and love and are going to use, and you should continue to do that. And so it's a good thing to be doing those things. And then the be human on that context is make sure that you're not putting your employees at risk. And like, for example, the business in New York that said, look, we can shift our 3D manufacturing to manufacturing face shields. And those face shields could be really helpful for first line responders and everything else. And we're right here and we could do 2,000 a day. And I was like, great. And I said, look, just make sure that you ask your employees to say, look, is this the thing that they want to do in heroism? Don't coerce them to do it, but make sure. And then when they get there, work 6 feet apart, work with face masks, make your own face, face shields, et cetera, as a way of doing it.
Amazon is learning this lesson about workforce.
Yes, exactly. So yes, you have this great opportunity. I mean, Amazon has a huge economic opportunity, but it's like, no. But then make sure that you're investing very heavily, right, in doing the right thing for your employees. And then of course, by the way, part of the question is, doing the right thing with investors, but doing the right thing with investors is always pretty straightforward, which is if you create a strong business that 3 years from now is thriving, you're good with your investors. They may not fully realize that what the play is in order to get there.
Yeah, it's just getting them to think in terms of a 3-year, not 3-month horizon, right? Isn't that always the entrepreneur's dilemma? All right, that's a great segue into Alan. So Alan, why don't you take on some of the fundraising and what you've been seeing from Catalyst's side?
Yeah, sure. So again, Reid, thanks for being here and for doing this. You referenced in the intro kind of the origin story of Endeavor Catalyst, that we so many years ago. We've now been investing in Endeavor companies for 7 years. We have 130 different companies in the portfolio. A number of them are on the line. A lot of the things I'm spending my days doing right now is talking to entrepreneurs about the relationships with their investors and kind of how to navigate this, during this time. And I think your perspective as both an entrepreneur and now an investor at Greylock would be very useful here, right? So I guess just to start out, as an investor through Greylock, you sit on, boards or observer seats with Airbnb, Convoy, Zappo, which is a company founded by an Endeavor entrepreneur, Wences Casares, they have in common. What are some of the things you guys are talking about in those board meetings? And I really mean kind of what are some of the topics that come up or the frameworks that you find useful or exercises that you're going through that we might encourage some of our entrepreneurs to even do with their boards and their investors?
So the key thing is that first you do is you say, look, here is our hypothesis about, like, we know that sometime from April, through June, July, there's going to be this intense volatility. This is what our news crushed most volatility to the down. This is what our hypothesis of that is, and this is what our hypothesis is about what what August post, kind of grows to and looks like. And you're not going to have great evidence for that. That's a little bit of the, okay, where is it between a recession and a depression and catastrophe? Kind of where is these things? And you say, okay, great. That's our working hypothesis. That's where we're going to kind of set a budget. Don't presume like it's all going to be, head into the hills with cans of tuna fish, because, if we're in that situation, it's a totally different thing. And then figure out how you can get the earliest monitoring signals of am I accurate in my model, right? And accurate's like within a plus 10 to 20%, kind of direction. For example, a common thing is checking in with customers, finding out kind of where your customers are at. It's a good thing anyway from a communications, trust building, branding perspective. Like when people are saying, okay, we have distribution partners, or we have folks, we'll check in with them and say, hey, look, what do you see happening? And yes, they'll say, well, we don't know. It's like, yeah, that's fine. Let's just, and because, and then you can also share with them what you're seeing. Like you say, well, look, actually people think that the following thing is going to pick up in terms of the following kinds of supply chains. Like, one of my portfolio companies provides these 2-directional network cameras for increasing driver safety and goes into all kinds of commercial fleets. And of course they see passenger traffic going down and they see logistics traffic going up. They say, well, here are the patterns by which we've seen changes in passenger traffic, but it's still there, and changes in logistics traffic, and this is how it's working, and then they share that with folks too, because they're like, look, that's we're all in this deep fog running across uneven ground with potential mines in the field, trying to sort that out, right? And so helping each other in that. And so you do that to try to figure out what your monitoring is. Then your discussion with your board is to say, well, we're not in a place where we can guarantee the business. Because, for example, if you say you do like what, some restaurant, well, a number of restaurants have done, is say, well, we've laid off all employees but like one, like the manager.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't necessarily guarantee your business. Right? It guarantees you don't have a cost structure, but like, is the restart actually going to be there? What's going to happen in rent? I mean, it's kind of an instant. So there's some level of risk to the business anyway. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to say, look, how do we calibrate that level of risk for a combination of maximizing, kind of the ongoing nature of the business and capitalizing on opportunity within the risk envelope we have already? Because there isn't, like, and entrepreneurs, we're familiar with this, the risk envelope isn't zero, right? The risk envelope, like there's a real risk envelope, and then you kind of manage it. And then the last point on it is you say, look, you articulate what those risks are, and then you try to align what those risks are to what you're monitoring, right? And you say, look, and here's our potential fallback plan B, right? In terms of how to play it out. And then the very last part is you say, well, if your board's not realizing that this is shifting you back into an entrepreneurial circumstance where you're having to do risk mitigation, you're venturing out into the unknown as doing it, then, that's when you call us and, Endeavor and so on, and
Sure.
look, help with this, because like maneuverability here really, really matters. And as per that earlier question, part of starting to maneuver early, as we know as entrepreneurs, is a very intense differential survival feature from maneuvering late.
Yeah, I think that the timing of those decisions obviously will have a very big impact on our companies. And one of the big topics everyone's talking about, right, is essentially the scenario planning, and you've commented on kind of some frameworks for that, and really about how to create more runway, right? And in a number of our businesses, especially in emerging markets around the world, these venture ecosystems are more nascent. They're in formation. The capital's not quite in the same maturity level, I guess, as Silicon Valley. What's your kind of general advice to entrepreneurs, be it in Brazil or Turkey or Indonesia, right, in some of these less formed venture ecosystems, on how to think about creating runway for their business, right? Or maybe when this started, they had 9 months in the bank, and now, frankly, you'd want more than that.
Yep. So the obvious highline principles are try to get yourself as much runway as possible. Really do think about that runway thing, because generally speaking, even in the Valley, financing is hard right now. I mean, basically the Valley is still doing selective growth financings for companies that were already kind of on a growth path towards, being IPO-able companies. So those financings are fine. Series A's are fine. A little lower valuation, takes twice as long. Maybe fewer of them get done, but they're still there. Everything else, no one's doing external financings, and probably won't be through sometime through the summer, somewhere between June and September, like before that happens. And so even here, it's a serious challenge. And so you have to think about what capital is going to be a serious challenge. So runway, super important. But you runway with a keep the business going. Runway with a realize the opportunity. Runway with a recognition that you're still taking risks, right? Like just like anything else. So it's just like, okay, so how do you do that? And then the next question is kind of obvious, which is, and by the way, there's a whole stack on the runway thing, just in case people aren't tracking. It's like, part of what you do is sometimes say, look, a bunch of people are willing to take salary cuts. Basically, we've had over half of our startups do versions like that. Sometimes you can furlough people. You say, look, we don't know what May and June is going to be like, so we're going to furlough for May and June. Even though furloughing is frequently like seasonal business, like we're just going to furlough people to see where we are, right? And obviously, if your furloughed employee goes and gets another job, then it is what it is. But it's kind of in the look. Our intent is to hire you back, right? But we gotta kind of check it. So there's a whole range of different kinds of things on expense management that aren't just kind of reductions in force and layoffs and so forth, which obviously some of that too. Then the question is, say, well, what are the various sources of capital by which you can shore up, right? And and if you do have capital that is willing to be supportive, and even if it's expensive, it's draconian to expensive, again, it's one of the things I'd call Endeavor and other entrepreneurs and find out where the line is, because you can't have investors being pretty rapacious in times like this. But like, even if it's expensive, it's worth showing up the balance sheet, because part of it's similar to the reasons why starting a business, if you can get the capital in a recession, is usually much more predictive to success than starting it in a boom, because the differential ability of that you have a business going in recession where you have capital to make it happen gives you a velocity head start on other competitors. Whereas in a boom, you get more competitors and all the rest. So that's actually a differential thing. And looking at the recession as a way of doing that is an important thing. So that's another set of, relatively straightforward, obvious things, which is what are the things you can do to kind of shore up capital. And then the question is, well, are there things that you can do that that are kind of light equivalents of that shore up of capital, where you say, look, hey, you're a business, you really like our product, we'll give you a deal, but like buy up front, like buy a year, right? That kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Prepay, et cetera, right? Because if you have customers that can do that, then sure, like you're taking like it may be a little bit out, the contract may be a little bit unprofitable for the year that you're doing that, but you then also have the capital to then operate and get back into the kind of profitable. So, entrepreneurs think creatively in these arenas too, as ways to kind of think about what you might do, right, to get through it. Because by the way, part of it in these difficult, challenging things, I by no means mean to suggest this is easy. When you get through the other side of this, as you succeed in doing it, you're much stronger, right? You've learned a bunch of things. Like there's a bunch of Silicon Valley companies that are weak in cost discipline. One of the things that emerging market entrepreneurs know 1,000x better than Silicon Valley people. Well, now they're learning some cost discipline, not as much as the other places, because it isn't the crucible on that isn't as intense here as it is other places, but still learning that. And so those are the kinds of things to look at. And then with investors, you just kind of have to, kind of persuade them that it's like, look, we're in risks situation, but come along, like we're balancing upside and downside in how we're thinking about this, right? And come along with us for that ride.
Yeah, I guess one last one that is fairly specific and tactical on fundraising, and then I know with Linda we're going to open it up to some more entrepreneur questions, is in those conversations with existing investors, and I think, Reid, you've probably been on both sides of this conversation, what is actually the right instrument or tool to do a financing in this time, right? Because we've had people say, hey, you just go back and reopen your last round and top it off. You raise a convertible note because nobody knows. You raise a new price round on whatever terms you can get. Obviously, every situation is different, but do you have an opinion or a framework on kind of what is the best way to try to raise money with existing insiders in this context?
So, generally speaking, part of at least what I find that I sometimes, as a co-investor, have to explain to other investors is say, look, there's this natural thing where you say, well, look, the price of capital, since there's not very much capital here, the price of capital is super expensive, and I'm just going to, reset and recap the company and so forth. And that's a classic, I think, investor mistake, which is being penny-wise and pound-foolish. It's a classic mistake that happens. So you do, you say, look, yes, capital is more expensive. Yes, capital should be like as we shore up capital, we get it, that capital will get a higher return on capital versus, kind of the entrepreneurial labor in this particular thing. But you want to keep the team motivated. You're actually not playing for downside. You're playing for upside. You're playing for, part of this thing is, one of the things I love about entrepreneurship is a non-zero sum game, is that the two of us go into this together and we build something where both of us become huge winners when we succeed.
Right.
And so it's to say, look, what you want to do is you want to say, look, it's a good thing for you to support us in a way that helps us do that. And so, whatever the level of your conversation with the investors, whatever the, kind of endeavor bringing in, and then it's kind of the question of whether or not, how much the investors can do, because investors are also worried about, how much liquidity they have in their funds, which companies they're going to need to support, how does this play out? So, it's not that it's simply a walk in the park because they happen to be, kind of sitting on a fund.
Right.
There's a whole bunch of stuff that's going on there. And then, part of what you look at is say, look, let's, and if you're going to have, think you're going to need internal capital, starting that conversation sooner. It's sooner because, look, we have liquidity now, sooner because the business looks like good shape. We can have the time to kind of negotiate for, look, well, maybe we'll take extra warrant coverage or special pricing provisions or something else on this particular capital in order to kind of shore it up, but we'll do it now. And so that's again the maneuver early as part of doing it. And those are, I think, the important things to do as part of that thing. Now, investors will naturally say, well, look, we'd rather just wait until the month before the cash is out and do that. It preserves their own optionality. They see where the business is going. the pricing will be much better for them in that circumstance in the zero sum, because that's the zero sum part of this game. And part of what you want to reinforce to them, say, look, but actually, in fact, if you value the fact that your shares are already here, or you're already in the company, and you want to have the employees motivated, not looking at other things, not worried about what's going to happen, not playing for upside, which is what's valuable for you, rather than trying to preserve downside, then you want to help shore us up now, right?
Right.
So this is a way of having that conversation with them that is expressing it in their own interests, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the reason why you want to play ball now and not wait until 2 weeks or 4 weeks before money out, right? As a way of having a conversation.
Let me jump in, because we've had a lot of questions during this segment from the entrepreneurs. And I want to shift from the funders and boards to the teams. So the first question is from Teo of Paga in Nigeria, and he's asking about the level of sort of transparency with the team on the financial position, wanting to be, transparent and showing the P&L summary, but not wanting to freak them out. So how do you balance that as a leader?
So it's obviously specific on teams and specific on leadership and that kind of thing. I think that usually my approach to handling crises as a leader, which this is of course just an intense crisis, an unique and kind of a bit of an asteroid hitting the economy of the world. But what you do is you say, look, these are our legitimate challenges, right? These are the things that are the real risks. These are the things that are the real thing. And here is why I think we can win this game. Here is why I think we can play and win. And this is why I think there's a good possibility of it. And then kind of say, look, and I believe in us. I believe that we have the possibility of doing that. And so it's a lot like when you think about the heroic movies of the speech that Aragorn gives at the Lord of the Rings in front of Mordor and so forth. It's I recognize your fear. I see your fear, but we can win the day. And here is how, it's not just blind optimism. Here is my thoughts about how to do it. Here's my thoughts about what's a winnable game. This is what I think is the game we can play in order to do that. And so doesn't have to be proven. You could say, look, there's unknowns, there's uncertainties here, but people actually, in fact, want leadership, right? They want to feel like it's not hopeless. They want to not feel like they're just waiting for the sky to fall. So, but if you just go, hey, it'll work, don't worry about it. It's like, well, that's not credible. Or, hey, everything's fine. Well, that's not credible. And once you lose credibility, then your ability to articulate the possible path that you say, here is the game we can win, then also doesn't have credibility. So that's the balance that I find in having that discussion, which is, yes, real crisis. Yes, real issues. Yes, real risk. And here is why I think we can actually play this and we can play to win. And, frankly, part of what you're doing is you're sorting through the people who don't go, yes, I can do that. You actually don't want them on the team, right? Not that they're bad people. The crisis just may not be the right fit for them and so forth. But if you have people who are sapping morale and kind of like the oh shit, like for example, you have look at the movie again, you have the person who's going, oh my God, we're gonna die, oh my God, we're gonna die. You're like, that's not helpful, right? We gotta go do this thing. And so that's essentially the kind of communication you need. And sometimes, of course, it's get some key leaders in so that they're echoing the same message early is sometimes some of the key thing, and getting that alignment. So sometimes those kinds of ways of looking at this are really key. Anyway, so there's some tactics that go into that, but that's the overall strategy.
I always love your hero analogies and the channeling Aragon in the movie. That's awesome. A related question, which is coming from Alejandro Spadahome, also in the travel industry in Spain, is after the cuts. How do you maintain the morale? Part of you has answered that if you're not right, if you're nervous, you're probably better off the team. But how do you, I always think that the VCs don't address this enough, is when you're making the cuts, how do you then, as all 100 times, get people back into warrior mode when they've seen the person who used to be in the cubicle next to them, now is on the Zoom next to them, no longer there? How do you remotivate a smaller, leaner staff after tough decisions, particularly on furloughs or cuts?
So this is one of the reasons I prefer investors and board members who have got operating and entrepreneurial experience, kind of personally, right? Because it's like, yeah, this is key, right? And frequently VCs who's like, oh, I'm a pattern matcher, I'm on a lot of boards, I know this stuff. No. There's a difference from playing the game, right?
And watching
watching the game, right? So,
yeah.
right. So it's really important to do it. Now, and by the way, if the board members don't have the right guidance, reach out to other CEOs, other entrepreneurs, other folks, because it is important to get this right. The question's great, Alejandro. Glad to hear. We sat next to each other at dinner. I remember, took a picture, I think, if I recall. And so part of it again comes back to this again is that leadership thing, which is, look, you guys are still here because you're the cultural background, you're the stars, you're the people who are the blood, the muscles that can make this work. You are the amazing people that can do this. And that's why, like, when we had to make these hard choices, and even though it's not that we dislike the people that we unfortunately can't, are no longer, aren't part of the team anymore, but obviously, when we cut down to the essential people, the core, the foundation, the spirit, the raw talent, the entrepreneurial capability of making this happen. And so, part of what makes leadership, CEO, entrepreneur, kind of a lonely job is it's your job to be the energy output. It's your job, your leadership thing to go like. You guys are amazing. We can do this, right? That's the job. And so, and part of the reason, I refer to the movies and so forth is precisely, what movies actually, in fact, really capture with these screenwriting teams and all the rest is what are the kinds of things that can articulate to a human being that brings their emotions, their passions, their presence, their commitment into, yes, this feels very meaningful to me. You're helping me see that I have a chance at this, all right? And I want that chance. I want to do it. That's what that's about. And part of the reason I refer to this, they're actually, in fact, now they script it, and it's very nice in the Hollywood script. It always ends up with, the heroes win, well, or mostly, in different the script, but that's the usual test ending that works. Part of the thing that's good about entrepreneurship is look, what we're trying to do is we're building this business. It isn't the same thing as we're like running up the hill against the machine gun nest, right? Right. It's it's painful if it doesn't work, but we get to play again. Right? The thing about ongoing business. So it's okay to be totally committed to doing it because it's, it isn't the same thing as, and by the way, these speeches are the same speeches that, military commanders have to give up. We're charging the machine gun nest, which is far more frightening because it's like, well, there may be no replay after that. And so, and that's the reason why you can get that conviction and drive in order to do that.
Great. I also want to give a shout out to Mo of Katopi in Dubai because he had a similar question. But now I want to turn, we had a couple questions on blitzscaling, and Nadia from Mallory in Malaysia said, okay, if you're going to update blitzscaling with a new chapter, I assume there'll be a new book, based on the recent crisis, what would be that first chapter that you'd think about?
So we have been working on some of this, surprise. I don't know if I know yet what the first chapter is, but I will say a little bit of what some of the themes are, right? So the pause was like, do we have the first chapter yet? I'm not sure. Because part of the way that I kind of write books and content is I say, okay, this is an important point, this is an important point, this is an important point, this is an important point. They all kind of relate to each other. One of the weird things when you're putting them in writing is you go, okay, it's actually, in fact, more like a network of things where they're all connected, and how do you linearize it, right? Like, what's the way that it goes into a narrative where you linearize? Now, which is actually bizarrely hard frequently in these things. And so what I would say is part of the key thing is, and a little bit like that earlier question, is first to kind of recognize to always, one of the things, and we've had so much long-term of bull markets, we've kind of forgotten about this, but one thing that's always a good thing to be doing is red teaming, right? And is to be going, okay, so, and the red teaming I was thinking about when I was writing blitzscaling was like, well, competitors and just competitors during bull markets. But actually, in fact, part of red teaming is to be thinking about like, okay, what kinds of things could go wrong? And also being able to fire a flare of, whoa. Even though people had talked about pandemics before, no one talked about the economic asteroid of the response to a pandemic. And it's like, oh, I could see big economic things coming, because then you immediately go to red teaming. You go to, okay, what are the things that could potentially go wrong? How big are those risks? Now, by the way, you'll be able to elaborate a lot of risks by which you'll die. One way that I always sort through risks is like if nuclear war is more likely, then don't worry about it. Because if nuclear war happens, then again, game changes. That kind of thing is a way of saying, all right, like you don't take all risks to zero. You just kind of, you figure out what are the set of risks that you actually really need to be dealing with in red teaming. And part of now what we're red teaming is like unpredictability of the markets, unpredictability of capital, 3 phases probably to recover. One is the immediate crush of the next few months. The weirdness of the coming back online, even though like governments will be doing massive amounts of stimulus. Like one estimate I've heard is globally we'll do $10 trillion of stimulus in order to try to get through this, right? So like, and by the way, that means that there'll be an environment and opportunities and things happening there. That's the reason why it's not just the end of the world, economically speaking. And then back to where we always try to get economies going, which is just humming and growing and building. And so part of the blitzscaling part of this is to say, well, blitzscaling is always relative speed and relative. It's the first to scale that captures the opportunity. And so what it really means is all of these things are changing. The changing capital market, change of product market fit, change of the techniques by which you get to scale. The speed coefficient will also change in difference too. So for example, the kind of thing that we were doing at PayPal or like Uber was doing, where you say, look, we just back up the capital truck, right? And we just spend as fast as possible for market growth. Obviously, that's not the kind of blitzscaling that generally speaking you're going to be doing in capital constrained markets. And it'll be a way to get back there. And it's like, okay, great. Now, you may still be saying, look, we're doing things in order to capture a market and get first to scale. So we may say, well, as opposed to like being deeply unprofitable, we say, well, maybe we're being lightly unprofitable or zero margin as we're growing. And that's still blitzscaling, right, as a path to doing. And so the first set of questions were kind of like, well, red teaming this appropriately. And then the next thing is to try to understand, like when you get to kind of like, okay, now we have volatility in the market. Whereas previously, we say, look, we were expert, we studied the market, we did various product market fit. You need to be doing more constant testing. Like the classic entrepreneurial story for, kind of is like figure out your product market fit that presumably gets to scale, then start deploying it, figure out what it needs to change in order to get to scale product market fit. And then you're really going off the races, and maybe you're applying the afterburners and doing blitzscaling depending on what the situation is. Part of the things about volatility is that the various elements of product market fit then change and aren't easily measurable, because it isn't the, hey, you test this, then and you go. It's like, well, did the test really tell you? Is that test actually an indicative test of the overall market? Because part of this knock-on effects, like you say, well, look, a bunch of restaurants unfortunately going out of business. Well, then they're going to take a bunch of cost on real estate. So the real estate companies are going to hit. There's going to be supply chains. Those supply chains are going to get hit. And you're like, oh, then all of a sudden that comes back and hits my business, right? So that's part of the kind of the complexity of this connected market and knowing what's going to happen. And so you have to be much more measure, and not necessarily be, oh, well, we did that measurement and we're certain about it now, right? It's like, no, we're navigating our way through it. And that's, again, part of what you're kind of doing in red teaming, because obviously you can't pay attention to everything all the time. This doesn't work. So you kind of, which are the variables, and then kind of go back, which one do you check a little bit, which ones do you check constantly, and you're doing it. And it's a ton more work, and it's a ton more kind of sweat, tears, blood, and uncertainty. But that's part of the entrepreneurial game. And it's one of the things that, is part of the reason why entrepreneurs are so important for what we're doing.
Alan, did any questions jump out at you? I have a few more, but I just wanted to give you a chance.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. I was actually, Reid, you clearly have a lot of blitz scaling fans in the audience, because a bunch of questions came up referencing the book. One that stood out for me is, in the book, obviously you reference how essentially you guys were lucky with both PayPal and LinkedIn to have raised a fair amount of capital before the recession set in. And that applies to some of our businesses, right, who just closed rounds in December, January, February. So it's a two-part question. My part is for companies in those situations, what advice do you give to them? And then there's a question from Joao from Urbvan in Mexico, who said, hey, for a company who didn't get to do that, right? So they actually, maybe they have 12 months of runway, but not more than that, right? Because they didn't raise capital before. What should the strategy be for how to think about when the market will be ready to raise money again, right? And this is kind of to your monitoring point. What things can you monitor or look at to try to make sure you're one of those first companies to go back out and really engage with investors when they're, quote, open for business again?
So I'll answer the second question first, because it's to some degree more urgent, but then I'll answer the second, the other one, the PayPal, LinkedIn, et cetera, questions next. So you haven't raised the money yet. You have a certain amount of money in the bank. Usually the rule outside of the Valley is that capital raising is harder than it is in the Valley. And the rule in the Valley is don't try to raise money until August, right? Maybe September. And that doesn't mean don't start planning, don't start communications, but don't try to go get a commitment, right? Because part of raising money is like it's a form of light marriage, right? So don't try to walk down the aisle, right? Like go on some dates. That's a good thing, right? But don't like kind of, oh no, we're going to try to get this deal to happen. Unless of course you get signal, like look, at the other side says, hey, we're really interested. We'd love to do this. Great. Those are great signals. Let's have that conversation. And so what it means from a Valley perspective, which is probably harder globally, but maybe directionally the same, is to say, look, plan on, if you at all possible, plan on not trying to run your fundraising process, which may take a number of months, really formally starting earlier than September, right? Maybe August. Like try to not do that, because probably by September, the markets will probably be, the private equity markets will probably be reopened. Now they may be reopened very expensive, very selective, right? Difficult, right? Like all these kind of things, but they'll probably go, look, we've stabilized some, and we're now looking at what opportunities are. By the way, there's one asterisk to this that's really important. Like if you actually know funds that have actually just raised the fund, don't have a big portfolio, by the way, they're looking for business, right? So even now is kind of a good time to go and talk to them, because I've encountered a few of those where some of my portfolio companies come and say, so-and-so wants to talk about fundraising. I'm like, really? Who are they? Because usually these are people I haven't heard about before. They're like, we just raised a fund, right? So usually they're first funds. And I go, wow, great. Yeah, they only got one or two investments. They're not protecting their portfolio. They're looking for interesting opportunities. Great, go have the conversation. And so that's one part of this. And then so you go, okay, so if you anticipate out of funds that are existing, funds that have portfolios that are navigating, et cetera, that unless they're already doing that, you say that's where the running the process will be. But that doesn't mean you don't start now. And starting now can mean a couple of things. Starting now can be the theory of the case, why you're really valuable. Saying, hey, look, I know you're super busy in this time of COVID, but I'd actually like to start talking to you about my business a little bit, give you some familiarity about like kind of what we're doing, so that when we really start talking in earnest, you can see that we're the kind of people who say that when we say we're going to go do X, we actually go do X. You have enough time to kind of reference check me, because, part of the thing about, entrepreneurs that are on this phone call is like, you guys are stars. So it's like, oh yeah, these people are really good. And I can call Endeavor folks and say, hey, what do you think? It's like, yeah, look, we ran them through this process and they've been doing these things. And this is all the stuff we know about them. And this is why we know that they're really great. Right. And so forth. And so start doing that, because then, by the way, that makes the process in the fall a lot easier, right? They go, look, we may only do 2 deals, but like, we're going to really consider you because we've already seen that. We've got the relationship, the trust, the people we want to do this with, that kind of thing. You can start that now. And part of that is
then it can go much faster later with the groundwork that you've laid, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And by the way, you can also it's also giving you measurements, because if you're talking to them about it and they're not going, and they kind of go, right? Like, oh, good luck. Right? But you're like, ooh, maybe we need to talk to somebody else.
He's just not that into you.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. To elaborate the metaphor, exactly.
So let's switch to, we have several questions on the future of work. So I'll reference Gizem of Jobs 24 in Turkey and Arthur Vest in Peru. Yeah.
Wait, before we do that, I want to do the LinkedIn PayPal one. But
yes.
We'll get right there. I was like, wait a minute, there was this asterisk in my head. So, look, PayPal, the signal that we knew that the market was crazy was, I think we put this in the book, but was kind of like, we literally had investors, like international investors, who are wiring us money, finding our bank account, wiring us money, and then telling us they had to let us invest. And that gave us the sense that, oh my God, the market's gone totally crazy. This is going to blow up, right? That was how PayPal had the signal the market was going to blow up. And so it was like, close the money, close the financing, close the financing, close the financing. And so it was part of Peter Thiel's intelligence on this kind of market judgment that really led to this navigating, like getting the money in before the crisis closed. And then the PayPal play, which was a good one to think about, was they said, okay, how do we raise money in troubling times? And this was the thing that I wanted to make sure I got back to the Endeavor entrepreneurs, is the play is pretty good, which is said, okay, who is a high brand lead that the high brand lead would be willing to lead a financing round? And frequently that high brand lead is like a strategic. So for example, in the case of PayPal, was like Providian, which was the largest issuer of Visa cards at the time. So we'll go get Providian the lead. Now, part of getting Providian the lead, they didn't have an intrinsic interest in leading, but we said, look, we'll do this following business deal with you. That's good for Providian, right? And Providian said, great. So look, and it's even better for them, because as opposed to us just paying you a $20 million contract on this business, or maybe it would be a $10 million, we'll do a $20 million investment. But then we'll take the $20 million investment and we'll go to a whole bunch of players who are willing to invest but don't have the capability to lead, want to go behind a high brand, and we'll put another $100 million behind the 20. So even if it was like, look, we converted 20 million of revenue, right, into 20 million investment, which of course, like, what the fuck did you want to do that for? Well, the answer is the 100, right? Right. That's the reason you'd want to do that, right? Mm-hmm. And then we did that, and that's what got us through the internet winter, right? Like, if we didn't do that, we would have been totally dead. It was completely critical for us to do that. Mm-hmm. So that's, again, the kind of being creative on what are the kinds of things you can pull together. Because, by the way, what happens is, it isn't that all capital dries up, but like, for example, usually people who are experienced in doing leads, they're the ones that are most challenging. Well, if you can get a different lead, usually people say, well, great, look, like I trust that player to be reasonable. Mm-hmm. I'll throw in some money behind them. Now, it's a bunch more work, because usually behind that 20 million lead, it wasn't $100 million check. It was like 20 checks of like 10s and 5s. And so you have to kind of go and collect all those checks, and it's a bunch of work. And by the way, part of what we did at PayPal is we had a guy whose job that was. That was his job, right? That's all he did, right? It's like, fine. And again, those are the kinds of things to think about. So that's the thing on the PayPal side. And then on the LinkedIn side, part of this is, again, the utility of good board members. David Z, who's my partner at Greylock, came to me and said, look, hey, we see financial turbulence coming. They didn't necessarily predict the credit default swaps or the specific day, but we said, look, markets are overheated and so forth. We think that you should shore up the balance sheet. And so we went in short of the balance sheet. Now, then the fortunate thing is we had the theory, and by the way, one of my favorite expressions is, in theory, there is no difference between theory and practice, right? And in practice, right? So you're always testing, yeah, my theory correct, right? And so we said, okay, our theory is that we are recession not proof, but resilient. Because in a boom, lots and lots of people are hiring, and kind of talent market was the primary thing that LinkedIn was making money from that point. Still, the majority of the money today, although much more diversified. And then it wouldn't go to zero, because it's still like people still have recruiting needs. People still have, and now the kind of the passive, the ideal candidate who's not the job hunter, which is part of the whole thing that LinkedIn brought to scale to the world as part of the what your recruiting paradigm should be for anyone that you're really looking for, kind of key talent and star talent for, that they'll still need that. And so we'll still have, it may not be like the growth rate we were on before, but we'll still have a robust revenue line. As it turned out, that was the case. Now, what we did in the 2008 thing is we reset, not like we did a very tiny riff. We closed down, we put on ice some of the initiatives that we're doing, and we said, look, we don't know where it's going to be. Let's see where it ends up. Then we saw, okay, hey, look, actually, in fact, our theory turns out to be right. So then we said, okay, let's grow into that, and really do it. And we spent a little bit into the capital, but part of that capital for us was that resilience of it. So that's another play on it, depending on where you think your thing was. And PayPal didn't have that option. PayPal was like until we get to this kind of critical mass thing, we're burning money, and it's just afterburners. There's no way back, right? Like it's got to be rockets, and either we clear the mountains or we're a big tar ball, right? So that was the way. We had a different financing strategy. Anyway, so I wanted to make sure that the entrepreneurs got that. Linda, we can go to the next question.
Well, LinkedIn is actually the perfect segue to, we had these questions from, I was saying, Gizem of Jobs 24 in Turkey and Arthur of Zest in Peru about the future of work. I think one question everybody has is, now that we've gotten used to, Zoom, and how does this change the global nature of the workforce? Also, is anyone going back to real offices again? Like, what's your sense in terms of how this is going to, in the new normal, just transform the future of work overall?
So anyone who says that they know is a little self-deluding, right? There are some threads that are pretty clearly true. So, and also, by the way, one of the things to do as a business is to run the experiments. That was a little bit what we were talking about earlier, is run the experiments. Like, okay, so, should we have, like, for example, one interesting question is, will we be more productive if we have for example, no meetings Wednesdays, right? Or that we build in certain asynchronous work tools, that we're working much more on that. And like, what are the things that can experiment with how we work now that didn't before? And one of the things we're definitely seeing as part of the booms is, companies that are in my portfolio, like Coda, which is essentially a networked work tool that you can set up any kind of work process, real-time data, and it's pretty easy to do and doesn't really require people. It requires like Excel-like knowledge, not coding. They're booming because people are like, well, we need to have asynchronous work tools in order to make this work. And so, okay, Coda is this really, really easy way to set up our asynchronous work tool that works for us, right? That's part of the Coda thing. And so they're doing great. And so, they're doing exactly what a company should be doing. So we're providing businesses and so forth. And if there's they're doing stuff for the Khan Academy to provide education to kids for free, here, use our stuff, for this, it's the same, kind of moral calculus as before. Now, in the work patterns, what you want to do is say, look, there's a bunch of stuff that's not that is just suboptimal. It's not desirable. Like, we're all here. The ones of us that have kids, the kids are love to see them, but of course interrupting all the time and so on, then that's not part of a normal work productivity thing to offset against. And so those are just your patching for the near term. But like, for example, one of the key things that I think a number of companies need to figure out is remote interviewing. And actually remote interviewing is helpful no matter what, right? That's actually, in fact, gives you a whole new kind of early screening and a set of different ways of doing it and should be just part of the practice. Similarly, with distributed work, you may now say, well, actually, in fact, with these functions, we can actually do these functions in distributed work, right? And that now allows us, like, for example, take a super expensive area like Silicon Valley. It's like, well, shoot, we could do these kinds of functions and kind of distributed work and other kinds of locations. And now we've learned how to do them and learned how to do it. And that's the kind of thing that we should be doing. And we should, when we grow this function and everything else, we should grow it in this following way. Those are kinds of things that are for sure on it. And then there's kind of this question about, like, since we're using communications as the way to kind of notify each other, because like part of what grows work and part of what like gave room for Slack to demonstrate there was a new channel for a real-time inbox for close teams or distributed teams. I say, well, how are we using this kind of communications and notification to be able to work more effectively together? Because, like, for example, you might say, look, we're doing that now because we're doing it at, like, 3 p.m. our work time because we're both working at our home desks and blah, blah, blah. But basically, now, actually, in fact, we're broadening that. So I could easily see businesses saying, look, here's how our comms infrastructure works for normal, effective business processing. That's not just like Monday through Friday or not just 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., but here's how it works now, like generally. And we've put in these new kind of communications and collaboration infrastructure that allows the whole business to pick up speed because we've identified where the key points are, and we just make sure that those points get through quickly in order to work faster. Those are the kinds of things that you can learn and work out in this kind of means. Now, those are all general principles because, of course, as everyone here knows, the specific work is specific per organization, per team, per market, per country, per But those are kind of general principles.
We also have a question, a macro question about globalization. Alexis Pentazis of LS Direct in Greece is asking whether, at least at the government level, there's going to be, a backlash against globalization. Trump is so proud of the fact that he stopped people coming in from China. This is the one action he believes he took, and yet
a month late.
Yeah, exactly. But so many of our businesses are global. I love this story you tell of after 9/11 at PayPal being the lone person going through the metal detector at the airports and right and where travel is probably not going to come back so rapidly. But how do you think, as a global organization, as a global business, how do you think about this as your team, your customers, your workforce is more and more global, and yet if there is this backlash against globalization as one of the outcomes of COVID-19?
Well, I think there's definitely going to be a modest backlash against it, but you have to offset this, like predicting the future, right? You say, okay, well, are we now going to not do handshakes anymore, right? Are handshakes now dead, right? Just kind of take a little micro thing. And
by the way, the Kenyans got together, the entrepreneurs, and they said, how is Linda dealing with the fact that you can't hug anymore? And
yes.
Right?
Exactly. Now, I think that there's actually kind of real, like, people like human contact. There's a reason why handshakes kind of came up as part of the thing. I'm not saying handshakes will continue. It depends a lot on what the next 12 months look like. Like, if the only way we go back to work is everyone goes in face masks, then I don't think we're handshaking then. Now, it still may come back 3 years from now. But I think it's like, if everyone's wearing face masks, we're also maintaining, real social distance and all the rest, which will feel weird. It'll feel less human and so forth. And there'll be pressure to move past it. There'll be pressure to stop wearing face masks. Like if we can get to a universe where we say, well, we're not wearing face masks, people prefer it. We like to see each other's faces. We like to be animated. It's part of the reason, like, thank goodness we have video conferencing at scale in this thing, because we still get this kind of human contact, and it's not quite the same as being in the same room, but oh my God, it's better than the alternative. And so I think that will always be there. Now, I think there will be a backlash against globalization, but there's the same drive for it. Now, what you have to do is you have to figure out, like, look, how do we get as many of the benefits of globalization, and how do we get that distributed in the right way? Because part of why you're seeing the political turbulence is because, people are saying, well, I'm not benefiting as much from globalization as like, they may not be thinking this, but the thing that leads them to their circumstance, like if you're a Midwest American, it's like, I'm not benefiting as much from globalization as the cities and the coasts and the other folks are who are leaning into it and playing a new role in globalization? And the answer is, yeah, we need to help you with that. Now you also need to play the globalization game, right? You can't just say benefit arrives from the sky because of it. It's like, no, globalization does create a lot of economic value, and we need to make sure we're helping you participate, right, and play the game with it. And so you need to continue the upsides and then mitigate downsides. Now, I do think, for example, one of the things that will happen is that people will realize out of this that I do think a certain amount of business travel is going to go down, because people are like, look, we can actually make team meetings work and we can make groups work and so on. It's not as good as going, but I'm now going to have a return on time, return on capital, say, look, sometimes, as opposed to saying, hey, let's wait until I'm in New York in 2 weeks to do this meeting, let's just do a video conference meeting now. like, because time matters too, and everyone else, let's just do it now. Let's make that happen. And I think that will diminish business travel some. I think there'll still be business conferences. I think there may be fewer, certainly fewer, in the next year. But I think also it'll change that calculus some. Now, that being said, there's a tremendous amount of benefits to globalization. So one of the weirdnesses is the swab stuff. The swabs are manufactured in northern Italy, right? And now China's spun up. But I think one of the things we'll do is say, look, it's good to have globalization. Like you'd say, well, if you had asked me pre-COVID that hey, is northern Italy the global manufacturer of swabs? I would have said, Italy, isn't that high-end design and clothing and cars and that kind of stuff, right? Like this design thing, like swabs, right? And actually, in fact, what happens is through a variety of these kind of network areas, like a bunch of expertise, right? And they ended up being the global best supplier and could provide it. And so they did that. Now, I think one of the things we'll now look at is we'll say, look, what are a bunch of key supply chains? And let's try to make sure there's at least 2 or 3 in distributed areas around the world. So it's still, yes, pro-globalization, but let's make sure it's happening this way. Let's make sure that when we have crises, there's enough national infrastructure to deal with certain things. Doesn't mean everything, but enough of the basic things in order to make that happen. I think that will play out. So I do think there will be pressure against globalization. There'll be political pressure, a bunch of other stuff. But the raw benefits of globalization are so high. Like, for example, if we kind of wrap all the way back to the Midwestern comment that I was making, look, they don't realize how much of their lifestyle is provided by the fact that there's manufacturing that happens in a lot of the rest of the world. China, for all of the anti-China rhetoric, provides a lot of it, but there's also Southeast Asia and a bunch of other places. And that's part of what has made the world prosperity. And they just don't realize that that's part of what happens. And so I think all of us, on this call, recognize that, are intelligent globalization advocates. And the thing we just have to realize is, look, we have to steer to more of the upsides being participatory and inclusive. And that's, usually that phrase means minorities and so on, but actually here it means just the people who aren't on the benefit train, and how do you help them get in it? Entrepreneurs, like we create industries, create jobs as part of doing that. And then, so more recognition and distribution of upside, and then mitigations of the downsides. Because, by the way, one of the downsides is, and good, I'm not at the last minute for saying something. We will certainly see a worse pandemic, right? Like, one of the silver linings to this is that we're getting a dry run on a pandemic that does not have a super high fatality count, right? The high elements of fatality count are when you overwhelm the hospital system. But when you don't overwhelm the hospital system, it's still worse than the flu, and it's bad. And like every unnecessarily lost life or compromised respiratory system is a true grief moment. But it's not like if SARS had done this, right? It's not like the 1918. And the thing about globalization is we're going to see more of it, right? I mean, this is one of the things about this kind of a more network world. We're going to see more. And so the good news is we're getting a dry run about, like, okay, how do we monitor? How do we prevent? What are the things we need to have there so we can be much smarter on what could be a worse potential pandemic?
Great. Well, while you collect your final thoughts, I know you want to end on an optimistic note. Marina or Jimena, can you put up the screen? Can you do screen sharing of because Reid, as we said, really launched this, but we are continuing this Endeavor Presents Leading Through Crisis. Next week, we're actually going to have 3 top investors: Nico Sakazi of Kazakh, Martina Escobar, who's the co-president of General Atlantic, and Shailesh Rao of TPG, but who's also had an operating experience. To Reid's point, all 3 of those have operating experience as well as investors. Then Mercado Libre founder, Endeavor entrepreneur, Marcos Galperin. Mercado Libre is now valued at some point it was $35 billion. It was higher than eBay, which was its model in Latin America, and then it surpassed eBay. Then Kevin Ryan, serial entrepreneur behind MongoDB and Gilt and Business Insider and DoubleClick, fantastic Endeavor friend. And then Jason Green of Emergence Capital. We mentioned that Jason and Santi Subotovsky and the Endeavor entrepreneur who went to work for him were actually, they're the top SaaS investors and made the first investment in Zoom. And what a remarkable story. So we're very excited, Reid. Thank you for leading us off. And you know, this is part of, I've always said that when economies turn down, entrepreneurs turn up. And I am so proud that all the Endeavor entrepreneurs are turning up. And I think in turn, Endeavor is showing up. And we've had so many instances. We have the Endeavor Experiencia in Argentina going online. We've had a Chile match where hundreds of matches between entrepreneurs and funders, even at this point, are taking place. Every region is really stepping up. And so I also want to use this opportunity to thank everyone in the Endeavor network, because we're in this together. And I think, Reid, that's been your point, that if we're going to get through this, we're going to get through it together. So I'll let you, Alan, do you want any final remarks before we let Reid close us off?
No, just to say thank you to Reid for kicking us off with what has now become a series, right? And so the speed at which this all happened, like, hey, we had a conversation last week, turned into this week, and now it's a whole series. So thanks for your leadership.
Well, and Linda, Alan, I mean, obviously there's a huge amount of work that goes into this. You know, you guys are the ones who are crafting and shaping and helping the network and all the rest. I am simply a network node that's helping. And it does take a network. I mean, this is a combination of, it's that moments for individual, you know, heroism where, you know, as entrepreneurs, you guys have the skill sets for navigating this, right? You are far better mentally prepared, tool set, et cetera, for navigating through uncertainty, navigating through risk, building something in super turbulent times where there is more, you know, kind of business fatality risk on this. You guys are the ones that we went, look, when we looked around the whole world, you guys are the ones who are capable of doing this, right? So that's one thing, but it also takes a network, right? So don't think that you're there by yourself. I mean, part of the thing when we were having this Catalyst meeting and said, okay, actually, in fact, this is one of the places where the network needs to show up. And those of us, myself, others, who are nodes in the network need to show up, need to help, right? As part of doing this, what are the ways that we can do that? And so do think about this as like, oh my God, okay, this is, you know, me as a leader, me as an entrepreneur, me as a CEO, me as a founder, me as a, like doing that. And then it's me with my team and me with my network, right? In terms of doing it. And I think that's, it is a navigable game. If we're in a place where the entire economy collapses, even then, where do you think the economy came from in the first place? And in dislocation does come the kind of new opportunities, does come the new ways. It's kind of the way that the business is running, so the new things to do. And entrepreneurs, they're like, now this is the way things are going, and this is what we can build towards. It's product, services, organizations, businesses. So this is, you know, if it's the year of the COVID tsunami and hurricane, right? This is also the time for the entrepreneurial fleet, right? So, you know, this is, you know, it's super hard. I do not want to undercut the blood, sweat, tears that will go into this, but it is also the chance to do something amazing.
I love that. The entrepreneurial fleet. There's no better message to end on. We love you, Reid. Mwah.
Likewise.
Bye, everybody. Okay.